Discover the Our MedTech Lives podcast, where industry experts share their career stories, key achievements, and insights into overcoming challenges in the medtech field. Hosted by Zilko Rima and Kash Ikram.
Hi everyone, I'm super excited about today's episode because today we have my friend, my colleague, my mentor, Steve Bell, who has over 30 years of experience in the med device industry. He's an absolute expert in medical startups, and we'll talk about that in a bit, plus surgical robots. He's also raised over 1.5 billion in startup funds. He's a global media star through his podcasts and blogs. How to Start Up in MedTech. Definitely check that out, howtostartupinmedtech.com, as well as working with Joe Mullings, LSI, Device Talk. The list goes on. And now our MedTech Lives. So Steve, an absolute honor to have you on. Welcome.
Thank you. Now, what an intro. Thank you very, very much. Now, I'm flattered, and for me, it's a pleasure to be here also because we go back a long way and we're friends as well as colleagues.
Absolutely.
So delighted to be here.
Thank you.
Welcome, Steve. Very nice to meet you. First time
Thank you,
today
Sil.
for us.
Thank you,
And
Sil.
that's why I'm starting the question, because we don't know each other, with can you walk us through your career journey in MedTech and what led you to choose this field? And let me guess, it was all by coincidence.
More or less. It was a lot.
This is our number one answer.
Yeah, well, it was actually more by starvation than anything else. 35 years ago, I'd left college. I had a degree in pharmacology, physiology. I had no idea what to do with it. I was working on a building site, and I was desperate for money and a car. And somebody said, one of the best ways that you can get a car is to become a drug rep. I said, pharma, drug rep, yeah, that'll kind of work. Went for several drug rep interviews. And you got to remember, this is the time before computers. There was no laptops and things. There was no mobile phones. It was all done by fax. A long story short, I actually ended up going for the wrong interview. They sent me the wrong fax thing through. I got to the wrong interview, and I turned up with a guy who became a very good friend of mine called David Follows. And I turned up at an Ethicon interview thinking it was a drug interview, saying that they had two smashing drugs, Vicryl and PDS. And the guy just looked at me and said, well, a couple of things. We're not a drug company. They're not drugs. And this isn't even an interview for the sutures. So that was kind of how I got into it by mistake. And Dave just had mercy on me because we actually were living in the same town, actually about a mile from each other. So it was just coincidence. Yeah, it was a series of coincidences. And I stumbled into it. Yeah, I stumbled into it. That's how I got into this industry.
And what has been the most rewarding moment or accomplishment so far? Was it more in companies or with your own company? What would you think?
I think it's hard to say one single accomplishment. I think some of the things I'm most proud of and where I think I can sort of retire saying I feel like I've achieved something. One is the whole change from open to laparoscopy. I feel I was a very big part of that and moving the standard of care from open to minimally invasive. And I do feel that I've helped a lot of patients to avoid large incisions through my work and I'm eternally grateful to Ethicon Endosurgery and Johnson & Johnson for that. They're just one of the best companies I've ever been with. Brilliant. But I've also been proud of some of the startup stuff, the number of patents that I've done and the different devices that I've seen go from just, my brain out through and into patients. That's very, very rewarding. And then I'd say later in my career, a big achievement, I feel extremely proud of myself and the team at CMR Surgical, the commercial team especially, that did an amazing job of becoming the second biggest surgical robotics company after Intuitive. And still today, as of today, still the number 2 robot that's out there, bringing an incredible robot with incredible care to a lot of people. Very proud of that.
Yeah, I also had some interesting interviews. Yeah, actually one of my first interviews when I started was with actual pharma company, Chris Corbin at Phison's. I sat in the room, he walked in, sat down, looked at my CV, he said, "So you think you're good then?" What am I going to say? I just went, "Yeah, I'm great." And he got up and walked out. And I'm racking my brains like, oh my God, what did you do? Then the next thing, HR walks in and goes, you got the job. Well done.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Love it.
That was incredible. So, and he was a great, just a legend in the pharma sales industry back in the day. So you hit the jackpot almost. You go to J&J right at the beginning of your career. You get your job. You know, it's the number one company in MedTech, right? So tell us about your journey, because you were there when you left, you were right at the top. So tell us about how that journey went.
Yeah. One thing I will say about J&J is it's an amazing university, and I think later we'll talk a little bit about advice that you can give to people. That'll be part of the advice I talk about. But it's an amazing company, and they did a really good job of taking like a complete novice like me and molding me into a business professional. They were very, very good. And the career was, I did through the sales route. So I was a typical, what you call sales rep back then. And I did that, then did local sales management, then did the usual shift where I decided that, just earn no money and go and work in marketing. So, you go from earning commissions and stuff in sales, and then you get put into marketing and then get beaten up by the sales team all the time.
Yes.
But I enjoyed it. I actually loved that. Then strategic marketing. And then I worked on several special projects within J&J. So I worked at Ethicon Endosurgery, but then we were developing a cardiovascular division that I proudly named. I actually got to name it because of Guy Lebeau, who was such a fantastic leader. And I got to call it Cardiovations, and we created Cardiovations. And that was the minimally invasive cardiac, the beating heart, and we bought Heartport at the time. So that was really good. And then I had the big fortune to go and work for a phenomenal leader called Laura Angelini. And those who've known Laura, she's a larger than life character, and she's just brilliant and a fantastic leader. And that brought me to Italy. And I was at GynaCare doing the whole marketing for GynaCare. And that was really my career path through J&J, getting more and more senior roles. And they gave, considering I was very young at the time, they actually gave me a lot of responsibility, probably more than I should have had. But they were actually very good. And again, it wasn't just doing a job; it really was an education in how to be a business leader. They were phenomenal.
Right. Fantastic.
We always talk about transferable skills. So when you look at your career, what transferable skills do you think a person should have to be as successful as you are in the industry? So
I think going back to sales again, one of the things that you learn in sales very well is communication. And I think one of the most important skills across the whole of business is being able to communicate your ideas well, being able to convince people, because if you're in a large corporation, a lot of it is not the best idea that wins, but it's the most convincing idea that wins. Quite often in a corporation, you just have to accept that that's how it is. So if you want to be able to influence people in a corporation, both up and down, whether you're in a lower role trying to influence the management, or you're in a management role trying to bring a team with you, I think one of the most vital skills you'll ever get is communication. And that's again why I recommend to people, spend some time in the sales and the marketing department, because you get to use that communication skill to try and convince people either to buy or to buy into your idea if you're in marketing. And I think that's a skill that you take with you for your entire career.
Yeah, sales is so important. It's such a great place to learn how to persuade people, how to present well, give you the confidence to talk to strangers, right? You end up walking into a room and a bunch of strangers, and there you have to project yourself. So it's just a great starting point and a great place to learn. But it couldn't have all been smooth sailing. There must, a great teacher is some of the errors and some of the mistakes that you have, right? You think of stuff that happened that taught you life lessons or business lessons?
Yeah, I think, again, part of the personality that I am, and there's a lot of kind of A-type characters out there who have this kind of, we're very pig-headed, and we kind of, I think in Germany you say something like block-headed or square-headed or something.
Hey, you consider yourself A. Is there an A plus or A plus plus?
But definitely my character trait, what it can help you because I'm very driven.
Yes.
But what I learned, about halfway through my career was that can actually be a massive problem if you don't take people with you.
Yeah.
So, in many meetings, I would just think, why is nobody getting this? Oh, let's just plow on. And you soon realize that, business is a team sport. No matter how good as an individual you can be as a salesperson, even today in 2025, it's a team sport. And if you can't get people to buy into the idea, convince them why they should come with you, and then paint a clear vision of where you want to go. And I suffered a lot in my mid-career. I think I really upset a lot of people because I was just sometimes considered a complete bulldozer. I thought I was winning by doing that, but the reality is it's a short, hollow victory because you don't pull the people with you. And I learned from some really good leaders that you have to take a step back sometimes, and you have to get the consensus before you just plow on.
Yeah, very true. I had the same experience. In fact, in a training course, Silke, you were in that training course as well back at Edwards Life Sciences. We had this task that we had to complete, and we were timed, and the people in my team were very slow. And I just took over and said, no, but this one here, this one here, this one here, this one here. And in the post-analysis session, people reported back that they just shut down because I'd taken over, and they were they didn't feel like they were being heard, or they were able to express themselves because Cash just took over. And that was a big aha moment for me.
I think it becomes very damaging, actually, the higher you go up in the organization. People think as you go up in the organization, you go towards being a CCO or a CEO or anything like that, you should be more dictatorial. You should be more, you should make all the decisions. I actually think it's the opposite. It's almost like a reverse pyramid. I think that the higher that you go up in an organization, the less you should be doing, and the more you should be having your teams doing it. And it's really about painting a vision and then allowing and empowering your teams to make the decisions, where the people actually driving it should be at the bottom of the upside down pyramid, if that makes sense. I think it's a skill that comes with experience, but it also comes with maturity, because I think what happened with me is, I have kids, and you can't just dictate to your kids all the time. So, and I'm not saying that everyone in the company is children, but there is a human psychology about, we just don't like being told what to do. We like being given the why behind everything and then work our own plan out.
Yeah.
You were talking about starting in sales. I'm just curious because I started in sales as well, like 35 years ago. I started 23 years ago, and we had mobile phones, but it was so expensive that we were told, keep it short and do whatever. Today you have a flat rate, nothing matters anymore. Do you think for someone who starts today, is it easier, or because you're always reachable, is it more challenging?
I think it can be both. So I think one of the problems we have in the corporate cultures today is email madness. I think it becomes distracting. There was no emails when I started, so you could be hyper-focused. At points of emergency, though, and points of where you needed to be able to get to a consensus fast with that, things like Zoom meetings and stuff are absolutely phenomenal today. That was unheard of when I was there.
Yeah.
But I think you have to be careful you don't let it become information overload and distraction. You don't want to be tied to your email all the time. And especially someone who's starting and working in more, say, a sales role or a junior marketing role, you can become victim to these endless CC chains and back and forwards. And, again, I've talked about this in the past, and I think it's something that should be banned from companies, which is, the mails that say thank you, and then somebody mails back and thank you, and there's 15 people on copy, and everyone's, well, thank you as well. Yeah, and thank you as well. Yeah. So I think to answer your question, I think the tools are there, but they have to be used, and we have to educate people to use tools in the right way. And very interesting. I talk with my daughters. I talk with some friends who've got junior people, very young people who've come in, people like me, I'm an old fossil and I'm from a different generation. The way that communication happens nowadays as well, we have to be mindful from across the whole spectrum of the Gen Xers all the way through Gen Zs, etc., that everyone's communication style is very, very different.
Yes.
And those tools can become weapons very fast if you don't use them the right way. So again, I think we need a little bit more of just sensible education about how we use those tools, not just in terms of volume, but in terms of cutting across cultures. You know, a very senior manager in a Swiss orthopedic company may not appreciate getting an email with loads of emojis on it, right? You know, and one generation will put emojis. And then another generation will see those emojis and be highly offended by it. You know, they don't like a thumbs up emoji. They find that highly offensive. So I think we have to be just very careful of the tools. They can be good, but they can become obstacles in the way if we don't teach people how to use them in the appropriate way.
Yeah, you're always dropping these pearls of wisdoms, and you know, on LinkedIn when you're out on your walks and you're doing your talks, right? Like, I'm always struck by your, you know, work-life balance, right? That we need to have a work-life balance, and you're a big evangelist for that. So tell us how your thoughts around that crystallized and why.
Yeah, so there's a couple of thoughts around that, and I've sort of bared my soul on this a couple of times. So
Yes.
early on in my career, you know, I was flying everywhere all the time. And I've had 2 marriages. And in the first marriage, I was actually married, and she's from J&J actually, and we're very good friends still. But I was away from home a lot, and I wasn't as maybe present with my daughters as I should have been. And I was fortunate to have a second marriage where I've now got 2 very young kids again. And I'm able to talk to my older daughters, and you know, you can tell when you talk to them that they feel it would have been nice if you'd have been a little bit more present sometimes. And then you just start to, again, you get older, right? And you start to put into context what life is about. And life is about purpose of work. I don't say to people, yeah, you should just be some kind of weird nomadic hermit who doesn't work. But you've got to put it in context of balance of why do we work? And how do we balance that with our families? And make sure that we're looking after. They're probably, you know, in my world, they are the most important thing to me. My wife, my ex-wife, my kids, they're the most important thing to me. And I just had an aha moment one time when I realized that it was for 28 years, no more, it was probably 30 years, I had never taken my toothbrush out of my travel bag in 28 years. And you know, I was doing up to 1 million miles a year on aeroplanes. And what also made me realize was when the air hostess, she was actually on a Ryanair flight, I realized that they all knew me. All of them. They'd come and they would literally bring my drinks to me without me even needing to order. And that was just a sudden, oh God, I bet you my kids don't know how, you know, wouldn't know what I drink on the plane. So yeah. I think it was just a moment
Vodka,
of balance. It? Yeah, well, it was actually coffee. Yeah. So some days I needed more than that. But yeah, so it's just that realization, and you're very lucky that I've got a second bite at the cherry to do that. Yeah. And I think it's an obligation of me to talk to younger people, especially who've, you know, and I think anyone who's been through this journey and had a young family where they remember them being very tiny, and the next thing they remember them graduating. And there's kind of like what happened in the middle. You know, I was away. Anyone who's been through that, it's, you know, they have an obligation to tell the next generation it's not all about that.
Yeah, absolutely.
When you talk about all these thoughts, I find it super interesting. Did you ever come to the point where you doubted your career path in MedTech, or have you always been sure that's the right industry for me to be in?
It's a very that's actually a very interesting question that, you know, so could I have gone and worked in something like banking and made millions and millions and millions in banking and just been a ruthless banker? Do I have the mental horsepower to do that? I think I do, right? I think what attracts me more and why I'm glad that I chose the MedTech is the ethical and moral compass of doing things that actually, you know, really bring benefit to people's lives. And I know that things like an iPhone or things like that, they bring joy and benefit, and they bring all these things. But I think one of the important things that we have in the medtech industry is the impact we have on society.
Mm-hmm.
more so than being a doctor. I mean, I could have been a doctor, and I think I would have impacted, I don't know, a couple of thousand lives. I think in the medtech industry, and we've all been through it, the work that we do can impact millions of lives. And I think that it's one of the most beautiful things in industry we can do. Do we get paid the most? No. Do we get paid badly? No, not all. It's actually a very good career. But I think being able to have that satisfaction of really doing good and changing people's lives, and anyone, again, and I know we're probably talking to a lot of people thinking of getting into the industry, one of the most tear-jerking moments is when you go and meet a patient after they've had, say, a brand new therapy that you've introduced. Yeah. And they talk to you and they tell you how much better their lives are and how their pain has gone and how their family is better. And you meet their family. And that's that kind of moment when you sit back and go, yeah, I definitely chose the right thing to do here.
Yeah, 100%. I had an experience like that. In an American hospital, we were selling a cardiac product on babies. And I remember being in the pediatric ICU. The babies are there. The chests are still open because of the edema. They can't close the chest immediately. And I'm talking with the surgeon, and the parents are sitting right there, listening to my every word, right? And I just thought, wow, look at the impact I'm having, not just on the patient, which is a small child here, but also the family around, the parents, right, who are listening to everything I'm saying and listening for any hope. But I mean, it was a standard procedure done really well.
But we have to remember, we often think in third parties.
Yes.
But we're probably all going to be patients.
Yes.
And if not, at least our loved ones will be patients, or someone we know or care about will be a patient. Yeah. And I think, without the medtech industry doing what we do, things wouldn't advance. I think what we do is extremely important in the context of civilization. I think it is really important. And I would encourage anybody who's sitting on the fence thinking, should I switch from the airline industry into the medtech industry? Yeah. Nothing wrong with the airline industry. I think it also helps civilize. But I think if you have any doubts about the why you should get in, people should just park that, because what we do is so impactful and important, and it's self-fulfilling for all of us and our families as well. It's amazing how many times I see on LinkedIn, for example, how many intuitive people say, I had a Da Vinci used on me or on my family. On Versius, when we had Versius, I had people in the company who Versius was used on.
Wow.
Yeah, and so it's powerful. And we're not immune. We're not immune from this helping us in the near future.
Yeah, absolutely. We're all going to age. And one time I was with my wife. I split my head open. I still have the scar. And we're in A&E, and the nurse got the suture out, and I said, "Which suture is it?" And she looked at me like,
"That's the only problem you have in this situation."
Exactly. I said, "Which brand?" And it was your brand. She said, and I was working for the competition. And my wife just said, ignore him. He works in the industry. So let's go back to your career. So you reached a really senior position, right? You had an amazing career in probably the biggest and best med device company at the time. And you decided to go into startup world. So tell us about leaving J&J, getting up to the point where you joined CMR, because that's when, by the time you joined CMR, you were a startup expert already. So tell us about that.
So it was interesting. So I was 16 years into J&J, and you kind of sometimes wake up in some mornings, and I was thinking, well, I'm kind of doing the startup thing within J&J, but it's not a real startup thing. And then I sat there and said, I'm probably at a fork in the road. Because if I stay for another 3 or 4 years in J&J and get to the 20-year mark, it probably means I'm going to be a career person of J&J and remain here and do, the whole way up to the top leadership of J&J. And there was something about me that said, I've only been in J&J and I love doing the startup thing. And I was just compelled to say, if I'm going to do the startup, I have to do what I call the real startup. And I got, as I was going through these thoughts, and I was sitting in a lot of corporate meetings thinking, I don't know if I can have another corporate meeting. And I'm sure a lot of people watching this have sat in that thing. Well, you step out your own body at some point, and you sort of look and going, like, I've heard this 1,000 times, and you're watching another Excel sheet and everyone's going through the lines and you're thinking, is this it for the next 20 years? Is this what I'm going to do? So again, and again, some people love it and fair play to them, but not for me. And I sat there, and literally the next day I got contacted by a headhunter who said, look, there's a company out of California who's really interested to talk to you.
Okay.
Do you want to go to Switzerland? And I popped to Switzerland over the weekend, and I met with a guy called Brad Sharp, who's become a lifelong friend of mine. And we started many companies together. And he is like the typical California startup dude, out of Irvine, ex-Baxter, ex-Edwards. And he just was like, you've not really done a startup till you've done startups, and you've been down Sand Hill Road and begged for money and stuff. Do you want to come and do that? And I said, yeah, you know what, I do. So that was it. So I kind of went to go and just try the real startup thing. And I thought to myself, I can always go back to J&J because I left on very good terms.
Yes.
Yeah.
Steve,
and then I got
can
hooked.
I ask you to this point, because you just said you got a call from a headhunter.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of people would love to work for a startup. And for me, it happened through my network. Also, I was the first salesperson in that company. But I always think, like, if someone decides, like sitting in a meeting thinking, oh, I should do a startup, and the call doesn't come on the next day from the recruiter, how do you think they can get into it? Because I think it's really not published on LinkedIn as a job post, right?
Yes and no. So I think you own your own destiny, number one. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And getting jobs is not always about the amount of talent that you've got. And it's often about the network that you run. And a piece of advice I give to young people is build networks. It's very rare when you reach out to someone and say, by the way, hi, just introducing myself. I'm interested in X, Y, and Z. Have you got any thoughts on it? Can you help me? And they say, I don't talk to people like you. You're just a scumbag nobody. Of course I'm not talking to you. That never happens. People will always be polite. And if they can't answer it, they'll say, well, not really. You can say, oh, do you know someone who could? And I would encourage people to reach out to people. And I get people reaching out to me all the time. And I try and sort of pay that back by being as helpful as I can. But I think LinkedIn does help. And I think, there's no problem in saying, like, for example, let's say you're in Stryker and having on your LinkedIn profile, I'm at Stryker, but I'm very interested in startups. Okay, well, why not? There's no problem for that. But I think it's networking as much as anything. There are also specialist recruiters who do deal with the startups. So, go and look at some of those who deal with them. I was actually with one yesterday, which is Henry Norton from the Surgery Robs podcast, and now the new MedTech Crux podcast. And we were doing a podcast together yesterday in Cambridge. He specializes that. Go and find the specialist recruiters, the Tanya Riddings, the Joe Mullings, depends, which territory you're in and which company they've got on the books. But there are brilliant recruiters out there who really understand that. Yeah.
And to your point, Steve, you said build your network. I mean, you have been in J&J for 16 years. How do you build networks when you are with a company for such a long time?
Yeah, so I think you've got to be careful that you don't become part of the clique within the company and only mix with companies. So there are things that you can do. There's lots of professional associations. There's lots of professional courses. Again, another thing that is good about being as strategic is they have lots of money and lots of development money for people. And I would be encouraging everybody who's in a corporation to go on more broader courses. So I'm not a huge fan of MBAs for the content that's in it, because I don't know if it's, that brilliant. But what I do encourage the MBAs is the networking. Or you want to go and do some specialist course in communication where you go with other corporate people. And often there'll be other medical device companies there, or there'll be someone who knows somebody. And again, just spreading out. Don't try and stay just in the vertical of your company and only know the people within your company, because I think that's a little bit narrow.
Yeah.
Congresses.
Yeah,
Brilliant. Yeah.
I like, a lot of people go to Congress, they just stay on their booth and they don't talk to anybody else. It's like, no, I go talk to everybody.
Yeah. Well, they do worse than that, because they don't just stay on the booth. They sit on the booth, and then when they've got downtime, they sit in the corner with their laptop open, doing their emails on the booth and upsetting all the customers who come to the booth. So instead of doing that, use that opportunity well. I think you're right, Cash. I think just, go and mingle, mix and mingle, get coffee with some people, go to all the booths and say, really interested, go to the startup booths.
Exactly. If you do it at one Congress, next Congress, you're going to meet the same people. And you're like, oh, wow, what have you been up to in the last 3 months or in the last year? And that's how, and those people know people and they can connect you. And that's how networks can begin as well, right?
Yeah, and there are specialist events where you can go to these things. So Boston Device Talks, where I'm going to be at, there's loads of startup people there. Go to LSI, either Europe or USA. One going on at Dana Point next week with Scott Pantel and his team, who do a phenomenal job of bringing all the startups in. Invest in yourself, invest in your network. Go there and you'll meet 200 startups and 200 startup CEOs. You can't get better than that. So, I mean, again, I think you have to work on that. I think it's as much as your development as your sales skill or your marketing skill or whatever is your networking skills.
Yeah. It's a little bit how we met, right? Because we used to go to these conferences and it would be intuitive table and then the everybody else table. And we'd always end up on the everybody else table, right? So next to each other, you, Mark, and myself would be on fence. So yeah, so we got to know each other over several dinners like that. That was fun.
Yeah.
So so tell us, so you went to that startup, you got your first shot there. How did that pan out? And then what was next after that?
Yeah, so I'll sort of fess up a few things about that. So going into there, you come out of J&J saying, I've done 16 years at J&J. I know MedTech. Of course I know MedTech. Right. You go to a MedTech startup and you realize you know nothing about MedTech. You actually realize you know nothing about a real startup. I mean, learning how all the funding works, how, you build a document management system. I mean, never had to do that at J&J. QMS, DMS, you've got to look at doing everything, right? From washing the coffee cups in the morning all the way through to turning the lights off in the evening. And you realize doing a real startup, you learn how a business runs and you learn how a medtech business runs. And I think it's a phenomenal experience. But there's a few lessons that I give to people who want to go and do startups. The first thing is, and I preach this on my course, do not do your first startup on your own. If you've never run a startup or been in a startup, you will assume it's easy. It's probably one of the most difficult things in the world to ever do, is run a startup, and do it in medtech. It makes it even harder. I think one of the best things you can do is shadow people that have done it, because what you'll do is you'll learn from them. You can sit in what I call the passenger seat and you can watch them fly it. And now and again, they'll give you the steering wheel. But you will learn more doing that than trying to do it yourself. If you do it yourself, you'll probably fail. It's a high chance of failing. So I think that was one of the big learnings that I didn't know and didn't understand it. And the other thing that I learned pretty quick is there are people who know the strategic world of medtech, and there are experts in the world of startups in medtech. And they are two very different beasts. You have to learn the ropes in each one of them. And likewise, you look at a lot of people in startups who've never really done the big company thing. They go and get sucked into a big company and then they fail miserably. So,
yeah, fantastic.
And then after you did a few startups, and you're still on the board when I look at your LinkedIn profile for a lot of companies, and then you started your own business, right? How did this happen?
Yeah, so I've actually started many startups before. We started a lot of startups out in Irvine, Insight Medical, Minos Medical. We started those from scratch, just to name two. We had Partisan, we had a load of them. I think what I've done now is that what I'm trying to do is pay back. So the companies, I'm actually working in several companies. I actually just one this morning that I probably talk about. It's got nothing to do with medical device, but a very interesting company that's got to do with AI. And sometimes you start companies because you get multiple requests. So I kept getting asked, how do you do this in a startup? And how do you do that in a startup? And over the evenings, it would be the same conversation 4 or 5 times. And at some point, my wife put her hand on my shoulder and she said, I've heard that conversation now 8 times in the last 2 months. Can you just record it and just play it back to them? Because you say the same thing over and over again. And everyone says, oh, that's interesting at the end of it. And that was the inspiration for what I did for the How to Startup in MedTech, which is basically, I just tried to take my 35 years of knowledge of doing it, especially the mistakes, and compressing it into a set of video courses so that I don't have to repeat myself. And if somebody phones me now and says, how do you raise money for a startup? I'll just point them to the website and say, look, just go and watch there. Everything I know in my head is on there, so you won't hear anything different. So that was part of why I did that company. A little bit like the Uber Fractional, which is kind of we don't know if it'll ever work or not. But the Uber Fractional is, I've been asked, those who don't know what a fractional is, just for those who don't know what a fractional is. A fractional employee is where you're not really a part-time, as in you're not a part-time employee. You're kind of a gig worker. And you're just like, when someone gets a Deliveroo or something and asks someone to come and deliver your pizza on Deliveroo. So fractional is really about being an available resource that you hire by the day or by the hour or by the half day or whatever. And I kept being asked because more people want to be fractionals, and startups who can't afford, say, a full-time CFO want to use a fractional resource to get them out of a bind, just say before they're raising money. So I just kept getting asked about this fractional things. I kept saying, what's a fractional? I have no idea what a fractional is. And then I went and did the research and I said, oh, that's really cool. That's a really interesting concept. And, a lot of people want to be nomadic and go around the world and not be fixed to an office, and especially after COVID. I kept getting asked, a fractional CFO? And I'd say, yeah, I do actually. And then I'd put them in touch and I'd be on the email saying, hey, so-and-so, would you like to talk to so-and-so? And they say, yeah. And then they wouldn't drop me to blind copy. And I'd be on these 60 emails back and forward as they negotiated rates and then negotiated time. So again, out of necessity, and I think this is where the best business ideas come from, doesn't mean we'll succeed. But I just said to a friend of mine who's a really smart guy, can you build me an app for that? I mean, there's like an Uber app, there's an Airbnb app, just make it for the fractionals. And he said, yeah, okay. Yes. And that's what we built very, very quickly. So not often is there a lot of thought in this. It's about how do I alleviate my pain a little bit in my business.
Yeah. Fantastic.
How do you select the projects? I mean, now that you are so well known, a lot of people might contact you, and I guess you cannot always say yes to everything.
No.
How do you select your project?
Yeah, so it's in terms of on the MedTech side, and I'll talk about the non-MedTech side in a minute, it has to really interest me. I think I'm at a stage in my career now where I'm not going to go and do something that I think is just, it's just not exciting to me. And that doesn't mean it's not exciting. It means it's not exciting to me. Okay. And it has to be things as well where I can bring value. So if somebody said to me, for example, we'd like you to help us with a biotech project, I would just glass over. I know nothing about biotech. I know nothing about pharma, which, by the way, is a pet peeve of mine, where people come from those industries thinking they're going to run a medtech company. I don't know why they think it works that way, but not the other way. But yeah, so there's lots of things. I have to be able to add value. If I can't add value, then I shouldn't be helping. And then quite often, and this is something that this conversation happened last week, I won't work with fools. And I won't be, I mean, in a big corporation, you're sometimes forced to work with people that you would never, ever want to even talk to, right? I don't suffer fools anymore because I don't need to. So I will only work with people who, I think are listening, intelligent enough to, listen, take advice and seek advice. People who I enjoy being with and being around, because life is very, very short. And to be working day in, day out with people who just rub against you or grate on you, why do that to yourself?
I'm just going to scrub that question off my list, like why we haven't worked together.
Yeah. We have. Not officially, but we've worked together enough.
And imagine, Steve, we have worked together 3 times already.
Yeah. Exactly.
And your non-MedTech stuff?
Yeah, so today I've been on a really interesting thing. So a very dear friend of mine is one of the ex-presidents of Paramount Pictures, and AI is touching all fields. And I often talk with him because I lecture at Unicamillus University, where he lectures as well. And I did a whole thing on AI and robotics. And he was talking to me, he said, AI is taking over the cinema industry. It's completely taken over the cinema industry. And he said, sometimes you can't tell what's AI and what's not AI now, even coming into the projects. So that's really, really fascinating. So it was surely like, there was film and then there was like anime, right? So but there's 2 different channels that do that. Why don't you build, a company that just has on, their pure AI films and stuff that are emerging, because as the quality is going up and stuff. And he said, oh, what a great idea. So this morning we launched a company which is called Synthetic Frame, which is because AI is touching everywhere in healthcare, in health tech, in biotech, in pharma, all the other industries. And why I look at that industry first is they are doing things at such a speed. And I'm realizing that other industries like ours lag a little bit behind them. But the kind of things that they're doing are coming into our industry quite fast. So I'll give you one example. If you look at some of the films that have been sent to us, the anatomy, the people are phenomenally amazing, realistic.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking to myself, you translate that and you put that into some kind of AI-driven training for medics, the quality of it's going to be almost like you're watching a real video of a human. It's indistinguishable. Some of these things I saw this morning are indistinguishable from, reality. And I think that it's fascinating to me, this crossover of industries. I also, I had a really good talk with a guy from the automotive industry, because autonomy, I think, is a big thing that AI drives. And I talk a lot with NVIDIA on this. Autonomy in the driving space is coming, many of the tenets of it are coming towards MedTech quite quickly. So if you watch what they're doing, it's heading towards us. Navigation, airplanes, nobody flies the plane anymore. I think we were at the conference last week together, Cash, when we heard the guy say, the planes land now and AI does it, and you don't get a choice. So I like to look across other industries out of intellectual curiosity to see what's coming. And when you get to work with someone like Giovanni Ped, who's the guy who's doing that, you get to see the whole way that they use things like blockchain. So owning the assets and stuff. And I'm hearing more and more that patient data, surgeon data, clinical data is going to all be owned on a blockchain. I don't know enough about blockchain, but I can sit and watch how the script of a film is owned on blockchain, which is just data. Yeah. And I see that that's how it's going to come into medical and healthcare very, very fast. The tools that they develop there, I think we're 6 months behind. So yeah, fascinating to me.
But when you talk about things coming to our industry, I mean, we have a lot of regulations, right? And approvals needed and so on. Do you think that this is a disadvantage for us, or is it something where we think this gives us time to really make it safe, efficient, and all what we need in MedTech?
Yeah, so I think, and this was a learning of me from last week at last week's meeting. We had a lawyer on there who was talking about this, and she was talking to the fact that a lot of this actually comes under consumer law, the AI. And I think that the barriers to it, we've put them bigger in our heads quite often in MedTech than they actually are. I think it's actually a little bit easier than we think it is. And automotive has high regulations, aviation has high regulations. I think sometimes and I think this is partly because we've just been through the MDR that has just been so painful for everybody. It's been like, had teeth extracted. It's so painful. So we now think all regulatory is bad. We saw FDA sort of swing from one way to another, and now they're swinging back. So we've sort of been burned a little bit in the last 10 years. But I think with the AI side of things, they've understood you can't apply the regulations in the way that you do to other things to AI.
Yeah. This restrictive thinking that you're talking about, I think this applies to maybe in the corporate world. You're this Lego brick in this huge organization, right? And you sit within this. But when you're able to step out of that world, take a breath, you can unleash your imagination and sit back and start thinking about these things that you're thinking about. I know it's very hard when you're in corporate to think outside of the box. And in many cases, you're encouraged not to. And if we want to give our pharma guys another punch, they're not even allowed to, right? Yeah. So, don't think out, here's a script, stick to that. But yeah, I think what you're demonstrating is very clearly is this ability, once you come out of corporate, hey, the world's your oyster. There's a big world outside of these big companies, and you can really do some fun and interesting stuff with that, right? And I'm fascinated by, what is the other thing you're really known for? Setting up and creating the second biggest robotic business in the world, the robotic company in the world, CMR. So tell us a little bit about your CMR story, because it's you started from 4 people sitting around the table to being a global entity, which is pretty incredible.
Yeah, so I stood on the shoulders of some giants with that, because there was the founders of that company who had already had this brilliant idea to have a very different robotic arm. And Mark Slack, who I'd known for many, many years, reached out to me and said, you work in the medtech. These guys don't. I'm a surgeon. Why don't you come and look at this arm? And I, for a long time, said, no. That's the realm of intuitive. You're wasting your time. There's a lot of train wrecks everywhere. And I just happened to be in Cambridge when I was there one time, and I contacted Mark, and he said, just come up and have a look. And I went up, and I was taken by it. I thought, okay, that is really, really clever. And again, there's your blinkers that come on from your own arrogance. I won't go and look at this because I know that they can't be intuitive. That's this closed-mindedness that, I suffer from as much as a lot of other people do. And they were looking for advice from a corporate and commercial world. And I went on as a consultant with Martin Frost, the CEO, and I was just consulting for them for a while. And I was trying to find them a commercial lead, trying to help them because I wasn't that interested in going back into a company. And Martin was persuasive, very, very persuasive. And he got me in the end to come and sort of join them full time in 2017 with the aim of doing 6 months to prepare them for launch. And then I would go away. And lo and behold, 6 years later, I was still there. And that was because for a few reasons. One is I loved the company. I think that the people there were amazing. What we were doing was amazing. We were very fortunate to get, a huge amount of funding at companies like SoftBank that fueled what we were able to do. Product was interesting. It was groundbreaking. And I think that, I like to feel that we as a commercial team changed the way a little bit that surgical robotics, are sold. I think we changed some of that, and we got to the number two slot, and it was a phenomenal journey. I loved it, and I learned a lot. And I could apply all my knowledge of both the corporate understanding and the medtech understanding, and bring the two together. And to be fair to Martin as a CEO, he gave me free rein of building the team the way I wanted to, and running a commercial organization in a very different way.
Yeah, you broke a lot of the norms, I got to say.
It's different. Would you share something with us?
Yes.
What was different when you say I built it in a different way?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things that we tried to do that were different. Well, first of all, I was very fortunate. There was Patrick Pordage, who was the marketing guy, he was there before me actually, and he just had a very different vision of how you market medical devices. And the dark reveal, as we called it, where it was like all in the shadows and stuff. It was the way that the car industry did, like BMWs and stuff. And he and Liana, who did that, I just give them full credit, choosing the branding, choosing the color schemes, down to Keith and to Patrick and the team. Very different than what I'd seen in a corporate world. And I thought, okay, these guys have got that. So I was fortunate to have an amazing marketing team that I worked alongside and with. And then a CEO that was willing to go and push those boundaries. Martin's about as nutty as a fruitcake as you can imagine. He's awesome. And the whole approach of the way we did it, and that, the way that he would act as a CEO up on the stage at a lot of the conferences, it was just very different. So I think that was one of the things we did different. Our messaging was different.
Yeah.
And the way we built the sales team was different. We didn't have the clinical bit. I did a big video on this the other day. It's 45 minutes, and you can go and find it. But I'm a strong believer that the day of sales reps is dead. I don't think sales reps exist in the future. But instead, what you have is company people who go in and do clinical support, and then you have a commercial team who are a professional commercial team who do business to business deals. I'm a big believer in this. Luckily, Martin let me do that. He let me do that the way that I'd envisaged it. And I believe it was incredibly successful, the way that we did that. And I'm, pleased that
I can second that. We've joked on this podcast before that in marketing in medtech was you take a picture of the product on a brochure, and if you're lucky, you get this wave behind it, right? Or the video is a video of the product from 3 different angles, and that's your job. But watching a CMR advert was like watching something on TV, in the evenings, right? It was a production. It told a story. It communicated the emotion of the product as well.
And it was also a little bit tongue in cheek. It wasn't so serious. And I give full credit to Patrick and Leanna for this. You know, their concepts like the Mini, driving around with the Mini and putting the arm in the back of the Mini. We weren't trying to be nasty to Intuitive, but we were trying to show our differentiation in a very British way with a Mini.
Yes.
And in just a very visual, different way. And I give 100% credit to that marketing team that did that, to have the audacity to do it, and also to Martin to sign it off and say, let's do that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that would never get signed off in some of the corporate. The blue truck one is my favorite. I got to admit, that is my favorite. And if people don't know what we're talking about, they should put CMR blue truck advert into their Google.
We'll all check the website now.
It's fantastic.
Yeah, and again, Patrick and Leanna, what had happened was we'd actually gone through a phase where I think we got a little bit corporate and stodgy for various reasons. Just as you get bigger in a startup, we were at 1,300 people, and we got a little bit corporate and stodgy, and probably bigger than our own boots at some point. It's just that's what happens with all startups as they get bigger and bigger. And to be fair to Patrick and Leanna, I think they got fed up of that a little bit and decided to be rebellious again. And they literally came with that video. They didn't ask permission. They just took some of the budget, and Patrick was allowed to go and do that. And they came back with that video, and I just said, yeah, you've knocked out the park with that. It's brilliant. It's brilliant.
Clearly got the message across and gave everyone a right giggle at the same time. So it's memorable, so memorable. Fantastic. And it was a rocket growth. I mean, you from very humble starts in Cambridge, 6 years later, you're a global brand with robots in ORs worldwide.
Yeah.
Pretty incredible. So, what was the secret sauce to making that happen, do you think?
Yeah, so I think a lot of it comes down to we had a very good mission and vision behind us of what we were trying to do, and we kind of understood who we were and what we were up against. And I talk about this a lot on my course. I believe in building cults, and I don't mean that in the negative way of stealing everyone's money and all that weird stuff. I'm talking about where, from the top to bottom of the company, there's a belief so strong in what you're doing that, people will just get together. And we branded it, we came with the gilets, we had the rucksack, we looked different. And it was kind of the cult of CMR. And I think that to be successful in a startup, because you don't have a brand, right? You don't walk in with the J&J name or the Boston Scientific name. You walk in as an unknown. So you've got to be able to build a cult that everyone believes in. And then you bring your customers along with you into that cult. And I remember when we started, people would turn up for the demos in shirts and ties. And by the end of it, they were turning up in shorts and flip-flops, right? So they kind of got into the understanding that we were different. And if you wanted to come be with us, you could be as different as you wanted. So I think we created this cult worldwide. And it was just, the way I describe it is, we caught lightning in a bottle. Yeah. There was just a moment in that sort of like 2019 to 2022 when we caught lightning in a bottle. We got everything right that we could get right within the commercial field, and people wanted an alternative, and we were the cool kids and the hip kids, and we got a lot of people coming with us. And I think the product as well was just beautiful, and the whole thing just came together. And it's one of those moments in time. I've only had a couple of those in my entire career, and that's probably one of the highlights of it, where I think as a company we did everything right.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I have one more question.
Go for it.
So I see you love robotics, you love AI. Are there other technologies or trends you are seeing coming to the market which you really like and you are excited about?
Yeah, so I think, besides the robotics and AI, but I think they're part of the delivery mechanism of what I'm going to talk about. So I think there's going to be more and more precision medicine. Okay, where you're going to tailor therapies to the patient's pathology and to their. So you're going to ablate a tumor, and then you're going to inject into it different factors or different inhibitors or mRNA vaccines, and you'll start doing these combination therapies that will be based off the genetics of the patient, but in combination with standard therapies. And I think what we'll get to is this very precise medicine that we're going to have. So that's one side of it I think is very exciting. I think we're also going to get towards earlier diagnosis and earlier intervention so that we'll get to tumors before they become, first of all, metastasized, and also before they get too big. So you don't have to take whole organs out. We'll take partial organs out, not whole organs. And I think we'll get better as diagnostic gets better, linked to AI. Diagnostics and AI will get better. Some of the colonoscopy stuff that we saw last week, Cash, was just like mind bending,
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think you'll get to diseases earlier and you'll treat them less radically with more precision. So that's one thing. And then there's going to be a whole nother set of things that are going to happen. Surgery, the face of surgery is going to change dramatically in the next decade. A lot of surgery won't be done anymore. So if you look at GLP-1 drugs, bariatrics, and we're at the tip of that iceberg because next versions, oral versions of it, ones with less side effects, ones that work better, they're coming and they're here, and we'll see a decrease in certain areas of surgery. I think we're going to see the same for a lot of other things where today we take out a piece of bowel for inflammatory bowel disease or Crohn's or something. These will be done with either molecular therapies or they'll be done with new metabolic therapies. And a great example of that is anyone should go and look at the company EndogenX. So it's Endogen EX, Endogenics. And what they're doing is they're putting, via an endoscope in towards the duodenum, and they put a balloon, and then they use things like pulsed field ablation. And if you've not looked up pulsed field ablation, you need to look at that because it's not the standard electrosurgery ablation. You're using fields to alter cells at a molecular level. So you're at the cellular level, they change. So what they're able to do so far in their early, and I hope that this works, is they can take type 2 diabetes and reverse it for a period because you change the metabolic pathway that happens within that localized area. This is going to be applied to lots of areas. You're going to be applying these fields. You're going to reduce things like, one of the ones I have hopes for, especially for my daughter, is that you'll be able to metabolically change the way that you have things like gluten intolerance or celiac disease. You'll be able to change the cells back, and you'll be able to change some of those. Diabetes will be changed. There'll be lots of things like obesity will be tackled. There'll be lots of things that will happen through metabolic pathways that will be delivered. And I think that's so exciting because for me, being able to do therapies that either mean that you don't need to take drugs for the rest of your life, that's great because patient compliance with drugs is not that brilliant, to be honest. I think anything that can get to early detection and eliminate radical surgery and get to either smaller interventions or therapies or avoiding having your entire bowel taken out for Crohn's disease, which is devastating for the patient, will be amazing. And I hope we can get there to do that. And I think we will. And I think we're only just touching the tip of the iceberg of what AI is going to bring to this. And again, I'm very fortunate to see other fields where this is happening. But I think that we haven't thought of some of the things that we're going to do in the next 10 years, but AI will. I think generative AI and some of the new models that are coming are going to work things out that we just haven't worked out before. And it'll seem strange to us at first and say, well, didn't think about that. And I think that's exciting because the acceleration of this now is going to be so fast. What a time to be in MedTech. What a time to be in this industry and to see these robotics and AI and molecular therapies and metabolic therapies and all these things. Very different than when we started in the 90s with massive incisions and, just basically amputating organs. That was kind of how it was. So I just think it's a really exciting time.
I think that's incredible. And this is so inspiring. We're going to get to our final question, which, full transparency, actually, is you gave me this idea, Steve, when we were coming up with the idea of this podcast, and you said, Cash, this is a really good question to ask. Let me ask it to you. What are the 3 things that you know now that you wished you'd known then?
Yeah. Well, there's about 10 things I know now, but the top 3... Yeah, the top 3 that I think, if I was going back and seeing myself at 20 years old and I could give myself 3 pieces of advice, I think the first piece of advice would be around what we talked about before, which is networking, and it's the people that really, really matter. It's really, really important. I think the second thing, which I had back then, but not everybody gets, is it's super enthusiastic about what we do. The enthusiasm is what will get you through as much as anything else. There are hard days. All three of us on this have sat through days and weeks of hard things that happen to us. And if you're not enthusiastic about what we do, then, and then the third piece of advice, which again, it's what I am, but I give it to my kids, is you have to be infinitely curious.
Yes.
Don't stop asking. The minute you stop asking and you think, I know it, then that's a disaster. I mean, I am known for knowing robotics, but I think I ask maybe 30 or 40 questions a week to people on robotics because I'm so curious. So I think having that insatiable curiosity, not just accepting stuff, but being insatiably curious, is something that I would encourage everybody who comes into this industry to do, because the more you dig, the deeper you dig, the more fascinating it is that you find. It's amazing.
It is. Well, Steve, I think you're a bona fide, genuine MedTech media star. Probably you're pioneering this area. I think you and probably Joe Mullings together. It's an honor for us to have you on. What's good here is people see you, they hear you, but now they have a bit of your backstory. Which how did you become Steve Bell that we all know today from our LinkedIn and from our computers? And as always, it's been an inspiring conversation. And I think, well, you always make me think every time we talk. And I hope you've made other people think as well about what they're doing now, what they could be doing into tomorrow, and what's coming. So thank you very much.
No, thank you. And thank you both for, first of all, engaging and interesting questions, which is great. And keep doing the podcast. I love it. I watch it. It's great. And thank you very much for having me on.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you for tuning into our MedTech Lives. You have been listening to Zilka Rima and Tash Ikran. We're committed to bringing you insights and stories that inspire and inform the medical community. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your network.